In our previous episode, we saw the great leader Moses lead the Israelites through the wilderness, guiding them with God's laws and preparing them to enter the promised land. But before he could step into the land, God called him to rest, and Moses died on Mount Nebo. Now, a new leader is chosen, Joshua, the faithful servant of Moses, who will lead Israel into their long-awaited homeland. The journey is far from over. Challenges, battles, and great miracles await. Let's continue the story. God spoke directly to Joshua. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now it's your turn. Get up and lead all these people across the Jordan River, into the land I am giving them. God made a powerful promise to Joshua. Every place where you set your foot, I have already given to you, just as I promised Moses. Your territory will stretch from the wilderness in the south to Lebanon in the north, and from the great river Euphrates in the east to the great sea in the west, all the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Be strong and full of courage. You will lead these people to inherit the land I promised to their ancestors. Make sure you follow all the law that Moses gave you. Don't turn from it, not to the right or to the left, and you will succeed wherever you go. God continued, let this book of the law always be on your lips. Think about it day and night, so you'll be careful to do everything written in it. Then your journey will go well, and you will have good success. Haven't I commanded you? Be strong. Be brave. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. With courage filling his heart, Joshua stood up and gave commands to the officers of the people. He said, go through the camp and tell everyone, get your provisions ready. In 3 days, you will cross this Jordan River and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you. Joshua also spoke to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. He reminded them of what Moses had told them earlier. Your wives, children, and animals can stay here on the east side of the Jordan, where Moses gave you land. But all of you who are warriors must go ahead of your fellow Israelites, fully armed, to help them. Stay with them until the Lord gives them rest, just as he gave you. When they too have taken possession of the land the Lord is giving them, then you can return to your own land and enjoy it. And the people responded to Joshua with complete loyalty. They said, we will do everything you command us. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in everything, so we will obey you. May the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your word or refuses to listen to what you say will be put to death. Only, be strong and courageous. Joshua decided to secretly send 2 men from Shittim to scout out the land, especially the city of Jericho. These 2 men obeyed Joshua's command and went into the city. They ended up staying at the house of a woman named Rahab, who lived on the city wall. Soon, word reached the king of Jericho that Israelite men had entered the city to spy on it. The king immediately sent messengers to Rahab, demanding that she bring out the men who had come to her house, because they were there to scout out the land. But Rahab had already hidden the men on her rooftop, under bundles of flax. She told the king's messengers that the men had indeed come to her, but she didn't know where they were from. She claimed that they had already left around the time the city gates were being shut, and she urged the king's men to chase after them quickly, saying they might catch them. So, the king's men went out in pursuit, heading toward the fords of the Jordan River. As soon as they had gone, the city gates were shut. Meanwhile, before the 2 spies lay down to rest, Rahab came up to them on the rooftop. She told them that she knew the Lord had given the land to Israel, and that everyone in the city was terrified because of them. She said, "The people of Jericho had heard how the Lord dried up the Red Sea when they came out of Egypt, and how they had defeated the Amorite kings, Sihon and Og. Their hearts had melted with fear, and no one had the courage to stand against the Israelites." Rahab confessed that she believed the Lord their God was the true God in heaven and on earth. She then pleaded with the two spies, asking them to swear by the Lord that they would show kindness to her family in return for the kindness she had shown them. She asked them to give her a sign that they would spare her father, mother, brothers, sisters, and everyone in her family when they took the city. The spies promised her that they would protect her and her family, as long as she kept their mission a secret. Rahab then helped them escape by letting them down through a window with a rope, since her house was part of the city wall. She advised them to hide in the mountains for 3 days until the pursuers returned, and only then to continue on their way. The men agreed and reminded her of the condition for their promise to be valid. When they returned to take the city, she was to tie a scarlet cord in the same window through which she let them down. She was also to gather all her family into her house. They explained that anyone outside the house would be at their own risk, but those inside would be safe. However, if she spoke of their mission to anyone, they would not be held to the oath. Rahab agreed to everything they said, sent them off, and tied the scarlet cord in her window as instructed. The two spies then went into the mountains, stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers gave up searching and returned to Jericho. Afterward, the spies made their way back across the Jordan to Joshua and reported everything that had happened. They told Joshua with confidence that the Lord had surely given them the entire land, and that the people living there were in great fear because of Israel. Joshua rose early the next morning. He and all the Israelites left Shittim and came to the Jordan River. There, they camped and waited before crossing. 3 days later, the officers went through the camp with instructions. They told the people that when they saw the priests, the Levites, carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, they must leave their positions and follow it. However, they were to keep a distance, about 2,000 cubits, between themselves and the Ark. This was because they had never gone that way before, and the Ark would show them the path. Joshua then told the people to purify themselves, because the next day the Lord would do wonders among them. He also instructed the priests to take up the Ark of the Covenant and go ahead of the people. The priests obeyed and carried the Ark in front of the people. The Lord told Joshua that he would begin to lift him up in the eyes of all Israel, so they would know that just as he was with Moses, he would be with Joshua too. God told Joshua to command the priests who carried the ark, that when they reached the edge of the Jordan's waters, they should stand still in the river. Joshua then called the people together to listen to the word of the Lord. He told them that they would know the living God was with them and that he would drive out the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites from before them. Joshua explained that the Ark of the Covenant, belonging to the Lord of all the earth, would go before them into the Jordan. He instructed that 1 man from each of the 12 tribes of Israel be chosen. Then he told the people that as soon as the priests carrying the ark stepped into the Jordan River, the waters would stop flowing. The water coming from upstream would stand still in a heap. As the people left their tents to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark walked ahead of them. Though the river was overflowing its banks because of the harvest season, the moment the priests' feet touched the edge of the water, a miracle happened. The water that came from upstream stopped and piled up in a great heap, far away near the city of Adam by Zaretan. The water flowing down to the Dead Sea was completely cut off. So the people crossed over right in front of Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the river while all the people passed through. Every single Israelite crossed over on dry land, and the entire nation made it safely across the Jordan River. After all the people of Israel had completely crossed over the Jordan River, the Lord spoke to Joshua again. God instructed him to choose 12 men, one from each tribe, and give them a special command. These men were to go back into the middle of the Jordan, to the exact spot where the priests were still standing with the Ark of the Covenant, and each man was to pick up a stone. They were to carry those 12 stones out of the river and bring them to the place where the people would camp that night. So Joshua gathered the 12 men just as he had been told, and he gave them the Lord's instructions. Each man was to lift a large stone onto his shoulder as a symbol for his tribe. These stones would serve as a sign to future generations. One day, when their children asked, "What do these stones mean?" the parents would explain that it was to remember how the waters of the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Covenant passed through. The stones would be a memorial forever, reminding them of God's power and faithfulness. The people obeyed Joshua's instructions and took 12 stones from the riverbed, just as the Lord had commanded. They carried them to the campsite and laid them down there. Joshua also set up another 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the priests had stood, and those stones remained there to that day. Meanwhile, the priests stood firm in the center of the dry riverbed until everything was completed, until the entire nation had crossed, and every command from the Lord through Moses and Joshua had been fulfilled. The people crossed quickly, and once all had passed, the Ark of the Lord and the priests also crossed over in front of everyone. As they crossed, the warriors from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh also crossed over in formation, ready for battle. About 40,000 soldiers marched ahead of the people toward the plains of Jericho, just as Moses had instructed them before his death. That very day, the Lord honored Joshua in the eyes of all Israel. From that point on, the people respected Joshua just as they had respected Moses. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua and told him to command the priests to come up out of the Jordan. Joshua gave the command, and as soon as the priests carrying the ark stepped out of the river onto dry land, the waters of the Jordan flowed back into place. The river returned to overflowing its banks, just as it had before. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and set up camp at Gilgal, on the eastern border of Jericho. There at Gilgal, Joshua took the 12 stones they had carried from the Jordan and set them up as a memorial. Joshua then spoke to all the people of Israel and reminded them again why the stones had been placed there. He said that when future generations asked about the meaning of the stones, they should be told that Israel had crossed the Jordan River on dry land. The Lord their God had dried up the Jordan just like he had parted the Red Sea for their ancestors when they came out of Egypt. It was a sign to all people on earth that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that Israel would always fear and respect the Lord their God. When the kings of the Amorites, who lived west of the Jordan, and the kings of the Canaanites along the sea, heard about the miracle, their hearts melted with fear. They completely lost all courage because of what God had done for Israel. At that time, the Lord told Joshua to make sharp knives and circumcise the sons of Israel once again. So Joshua obeyed and circumcised the men at a place that later became known as the Hill of the Foreskins. This was necessary because all the men who had come out of Egypt, the warriors who had marched through the wilderness, had died on the way. Though those men had been circumcised, the younger generation, who had been born during the 40 years of wandering, had not been circumcised yet. These new men had to be set apart for the Lord. The Israelites had wandered in the desert for 40 years, until the entire generation of warriors who had disobeyed God had died. These were the people to whom God had sworn that they would not see the promised land flowing with milk and honey. Now, it was their children, the ones who had grown up during those years, who were being circumcised by Joshua, because it had not been done during their journey. Once the circumcision was complete, everyone stayed in the camp and rested there until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua that he had rolled away the shame of Egypt from them that day. Because of this, the place was called Gilgal, and that name remained. While they were still camped at Gilgal, in the plains near Jericho, the Israelites observed the Passover on the 14th day of the month, just as the Lord had commanded. The very next day after the Passover, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. And from that moment on, the manna, which had fed them all through the wilderness, ceased. The people no longer received manna from heaven, because now they had entered the land of Canaan and were able to eat its fruits. As Joshua was near Jericho one day, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a sword drawn in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked whether he was for Israel or for their enemies. But the man answered that he was not there for either side, he had come as the captain of the Lord's army. Joshua immediately fell to the ground in reverence and asked what message the Lord had for him. The captain of the Lord's host told him to remove his sandals, because the place where he stood was holy. And Joshua obeyed. The city of Jericho had been locked up tightly. No one went out, and no one came in, because the people inside were afraid of the Israelites. Then the Lord told Joshua that he had already handed Jericho over to him, including its king and all its mighty warriors. God gave Joshua a very specific plan. He was to have his army march around the city once each day for 6 days. 7 priests were to walk ahead of the Ark of the Covenant, each carrying a trumpet made from a ram's horn. Then on the 7th day, they were to circle the city 7 times, and the priests were to blow the trumpets. When they made a long blast with the horns and the people heard the sound, all the people were to give a great shout. At that moment, the wall of Jericho would fall flat, and the people could go straight in and take the city. Joshua called the priests and instructed them to carry the ark, and have 7 priests walk in front of it with the ram's horn trumpets. Then he told the people to march around the city, with the armed men going ahead of the ark. As Joshua had commanded, the priests with the trumpets walked ahead, blowing them as they went, and the ark followed behind. The armed guards led the way, and a rear guard followed behind the ark. But Joshua had strictly commanded the people not to shout or say a word until the day he told them to. So, on the first day, they marched once around the city and returned to the camp for the night. The next morning, Joshua rose early, and they did the same thing again. Day after day, for 6 days, they followed the same pattern, marching around the city once and then returning to camp. Then came the 7th day. They woke up at dawn and began to march as before. But this time, instead of going around the city once, they went around it 7 times. On the 7th lap, as the priests blew a long blast on their trumpets, Joshua gave the command for the people to shout. He reminded them that the Lord had given them the city, but everything in it was to be destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab, the woman who had helped the spies, and everyone in her house, was to be spared. Joshua also warned the people not to take anything that was under the curse. If they did, it would bring destruction on the whole camp. All the silver, gold, and bronze and iron items were to be kept for the Lord's treasury. So the people shouted when the trumpet sounded. As soon as they did, the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the people charged straight into the city and captured it. They destroyed everything, men and women, young and old, animals of every kind, with the sword. Joshua told the 2 spies to go and bring Rahab and her family out safely, just as they had promised. The young spies went and led Rahab, her parents, her siblings, and all her family members out of the city and placed them outside the camp. Then the Israelites set the entire city on fire. Everything was destroyed except the silver, gold, and vessels of bronze and iron, which were placed in the treasury of the Lord's house. Rahab and her family were spared, and she lived among the people of Israel from that day forward. After the victory, Joshua declared a solemn warning: whoever tried to rebuild Jericho would be cursed. The one who laid the foundation would do so at the cost of his firstborn son, and the one who set up its gates would lose his youngest son. The Lord was with Joshua, and news of his fame spread throughout the entire land. After the great victory at Jericho, something went wrong among the people of Israel. Even though God had clearly commanded them not to take anything that was under the curse, a man named Achan, from the tribe of Judah, secretly disobeyed. He took some of the things that were supposed to be left for destruction, and this made the Lord very angry with all the Israelites. Not knowing what had happened, Joshua sent some men from Jericho to scout out a nearby city called Ai. The spies came back and reported that Ai was small and didn't have many people. They suggested that only 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers would be enough to conquer it. So, about 3,000 men were sent to fight, but things didn't go as expected. The people of Ai fought fiercely and chased the Israelites away, killing 36 of them. The Israelites were shocked and terrified. Their courage melted away, and they became like water. Heartbroken, Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark of the Lord. He and the elders of Israel stayed there until evening, putting dust on their heads in deep sorrow. Joshua cried out to God, asking why they had even crossed the Jordan if it was only to be defeated and destroyed by their enemies. He feared that other nations would hear about this defeat and surround them, wiping out their name from the earth. He also wondered what would happen to the honor of God's great name. But the Lord told Joshua to stand up. He said that Israel had sinned by taking things that were under the curse. They had stolen, lied, and even hidden those stolen items among their own belongings. Because of this, God would no longer be with them unless they removed the cursed thing from their midst. He told Joshua to sanctify the people and prepare them for the next day. The Lord would reveal the guilty person tribe by tribe, family by family, until the sinner was identified. That person and everything he had would be destroyed, because he had broken the covenant with the Lord and brought sin into Israel. The next morning, Joshua gathered the tribes. One by one, the Lord pointed out the guilty group. First, the tribe of Judah was chosen. Then, from that tribe, the family of the Zarites. From the Zarites, the household of Zabdi. Finally, Achan, the son of Carmi, was taken. Joshua gently told Achan to give glory to God and confess the truth. Achan admitted everything. He said that when he saw a beautiful Babylonian robe, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold, he wanted them and took them. He had hidden them in the ground inside his tent. Joshua immediately sent messengers to check, and they found the stolen items just as Achan had said. They brought the items and laid them out before the Lord. Then Joshua and all the people of Israel took Achan, his family, his animals, and everything he owned to a place called the Valley of Achor. The people stoned Achan and his family, and afterward burned them with fire. They raised a great heap of stones over the place as a lasting reminder of what had happened. From that day on, the Lord's anger turned away from Israel, and the place became known as the Valley of Achor, which means trouble, a name that remained even in later times. God reassured Joshua that he had given Ai, its king, its people, and all its land into Israel's hands. This time, they were allowed to keep the spoil and the cattle for themselves. But God gave Joshua a strategy. He was to set an ambush behind the city. Joshua gathered all the men of war and chose 30,000 strong and brave soldiers to go by night and lie in wait behind the city. He instructed them to stay close, hidden, and ready. Joshua and the rest of the army would approach the city from the front. When the men of Ai came out to fight, Joshua and his troops would pretend to flee as before. The enemy would chase them, leaving the city open and undefended. Then the hidden soldiers would rise from their ambush, seize the city, and set it on fire. This was the Lord's command, and Joshua made sure everyone understood their role. So, the plan was set in motion. The ambush group went by night and positioned themselves between Ai and Bethel on the west side, while Joshua remained among the people. Early the next morning, Joshua got up, organized the people, and led them toward Ai. They camped north of the city with a valley between them. He also positioned about 5,000 men in ambush on the west. Everything was carefully arranged. That night, Joshua moved into the valley to face the city directly. When the king of Ai saw Israel's army, he gathered all his men and rushed out early to meet them in battle. Just as planned, Joshua and his men pretended to retreat toward the wilderness. The king and all the men of Ai were drawn out of the city to chase after them. Not a single man was left behind. They left the city wide open, thinking they were about to repeat their earlier victory. Then the Lord told Joshua to stretch out his spear toward Ai, promising to give it into his hand. Joshua obeyed, and at that moment, the soldiers hiding in ambush rushed into the city. They captured it quickly and set it ablaze. Smoke rose up to the sky. The men of Ai, who had been chasing Joshua, turned around and saw the smoke. They realized they were trapped. Israel, who had been running, now turned back to fight. At the same time, the ambush soldiers came out of the burning city. Surrounded on both sides, the enemy was caught in the middle, and not one of them escaped. The king of Ai was captured alive and brought to Joshua. Once all the people of Ai were defeated in the field and none remained, Israel returned and finished the conquest of the city itself. In total, about 12,000 men and women from Ai were killed that day. Joshua held out his spear until the last enemy had fallen. Just as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites took the livestock and spoils for themselves. Ai was then burned to the ground and left as a permanent ruin. The king of Ai was hanged on a tree until evening. At sunset, Joshua gave the order to take down the body and place it at the gate of the city. Over it, they raised a large heap of stones, which remained there for generations. After the victory, Joshua led the people to Mount Ebal. There, he built an altar to the Lord, just as Moses had commanded in the law. The altar was made of whole stones, untouched by any iron tool. Burnt offerings and peace offerings were made to the Lord on that altar. Then, in the presence of the entire assembly of Israel, including elders, officers, judges, women, children, and even foreigners, Joshua wrote a copy of the law of Moses on the stones. Half the people stood on Mount Gerizim and the other half on Mount Ebal, just as Moses had instructed, to receive the blessings and the curses of the law. Joshua read aloud every word that Moses had commanded, and not a single instruction was left out. All the people listened carefully, as they renewed their covenant with the Lord. As the news of Israel's victories at Jericho and Ai spread throughout the land, all the kings west of the Jordan River, the kings in the hills, valleys, and along the Mediterranean coast near Lebanon, began to panic. They decided to join forces and fight against Joshua and the Israelites, as one united army. But while many kings prepared for war, the people of Gibeon chose a different strategy. They had heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai and feared for their lives. So they came up with a clever plan to deceive Israel. They disguised themselves as travelers from a distant land. They put worn-out sacks on their donkeys, carried old cracked wineskins that had been mended, wore patched sandals and faded clothes, and brought dry, moldy bread as their food. Everything they had was meant to make them look like they had come from far away. They arrived at the Israelite camp in Gilgal and spoke to Joshua and the leaders, saying they had come from a far-off country and requested to make a peace treaty with Israel. The men of Israel were suspicious and asked them, "What if you live near us? How can we make a treaty with you?" But the Gibeonites insisted that they were servants from a distant land, came there, because they had heard about the Lord God, and all he had done in Egypt and against the kings beyond the Jordan, Sihon and Og. They explained that their elders had sent them with food and supplies to seek peace with Israel. They showed their dry bread and torn wineskins as proof of their long journey. However, the Israelites made a critical mistake. They looked at the evidence but did not ask for the Lord's guidance. So Joshua agreed to make peace with them and allowed them to live. The leaders of Israel swore an oath to uphold this agreement. But 3 days later, the Israelites discovered the truth. The Gibeonites were actually neighbors who lived close by. The Israelites traveled to their cities, Gibeon, Kephra, Beeroth, and Kirjathjearim, but they did not attack them because of the oath the leaders had made in the name of the Lord. Though the people of Israel were upset with their leaders for being tricked, the leaders stood by their promise, knowing they could not break a vow made before God. Instead, they decided to let the Gibeonites live, but they would become servants, woodcutters and water carriers for the entire community. Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and asked them why they had lied, and claimed to be from a distant land when they lived nearby. He then declared that they would always be servants, working for the house of God. The Gibeonites admitted they had been afraid, because they had heard that God had commanded Moses to give the land to Israel and destroy all its inhabitants. Fearing for their lives, they acted to protect themselves. They submitted to Joshua's decision, saying he could do whatever seemed right to him. Joshua kept them safe from harm, as the leaders had promised, but made them servants for the people of Israel and for the altar of the Lord. From that day forward, the Gibeonites served as woodcutters and water carriers in the place that the Lord would choose. This incident began to spread quickly among the kings of the land. Adonizedek, the king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had completely destroyed Ai and its king, just as he had done to Jericho, and how the Gibeonites had now made peace with Israel and joined them. This news troubled him deeply. Gibeon was not a small village, it was a large and important city, like a royal city, and its warriors were strong. The fact that such a powerful city had submitted to Israel made the surrounding kings fearful. Determined to take action, Adonizedek reached out to 4 other kings, Hoam of Hebron, Piram of Jarmuth, Japhia of Lachish, and Debir of Eglon. He asked them to join forces and attack Gibeon because of their alliance with Israel. The 5 kings agreed, and together they gathered their armies and surrounded Gibeon, preparing for war. In desperation, the men of Gibeon sent messengers to Joshua at Gilgal, pleading for help. They reminded him of their agreement and begged Israel not to abandon them. Joshua wasted no time. He gathered his entire army, including all his best warriors, and marched through the night to reach Gibeon's aid. As Joshua and his men approached, God spoke to him with assurance, telling him not to be afraid. God promised that he had already given those 5 kings into Israel's hands, and that not one of them would be able to stand against Joshua. Encouraged by this promise, Joshua launched a sudden attack. The Lord himself helped Israel win a great victory. The enemy armies were thrown into confusion. Israel chased them down the road leading to Bethhoron, striking them along the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As the enemy tried to escape, the Lord sent a powerful storm of hail from heaven. So many soldiers were killed by the hailstones. Then something extraordinary happened. Joshua spoke to the Lord while the army of Israel watched, and asked that the sun stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon. And it did. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down for about a full day. There had never been a day like it before or since. After the battle, Joshua and his army returned to their camp at Gilgal. But the 5 kings had not escaped far. They had hidden in a cave at Makkedah. When Joshua was told where they were, he ordered large stones to be rolled over the mouth of the cave, and guards to be posted there. He told the rest of the army not to delay but to pursue the remaining enemies, making sure they didn't retreat into their cities. Once the battle was over, and the enemy was completely defeated, Joshua gave the order to bring the 5 kings out of the cave. In front of all the people, he had the commanders of the army place their feet on the necks of the captured kings, as a sign of victory. Then Joshua encouraged his men, telling them to be strong and courageous, reminding them that the Lord would help them overcome all their enemies in the same way. Afterward, Joshua executed the 5 kings and hung their bodies on trees until evening. Then, as the sun was setting, he gave the command to take down the bodies and throw them back into the cave. Large stones were placed at the entrance as a lasting reminder. That same day, Joshua led the Israelites to conquer Makkedah. He destroyed the king and everyone in the city, just as he had done to Jericho. Then he moved on to Libnah and conquered it in the same way. The Lord gave that city and its king into Israel's hands as well. Next, they marched to Lachish. It took 2 days of fighting, but Israel captured that city too. When Horam, the king of Gezer, came to help Lachish, Joshua's army struck him down along with his people. From there, they continued to Eglon and captured it in a single day. All the people were destroyed, just as in the other cities. Then they went up to Hebron. They took the city and all its surrounding villages, leaving no one alive, just as they had done at Eglon. After Hebron, they attacked Debir and treated it the same way, destroying the city, its king, and everyone who lived there. Joshua led Israel in conquering the entire region, the hill country, the south, the lowlands, and the mountain slopes. No one was left alive, just as the God of Israel had commanded. From Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, and the land of Goshen to Gibeon, all the territory and kings were taken in one sweeping campaign. And all of it happened because the Lord God of Israel was fighting for his people. Finally, Joshua and the entire army returned safely to their camp at Gilgal. News of Israel's conquests began to shake the northern territories. When Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard everything that Joshua and the Israelites had done, he became deeply alarmed. Hazor had once been the chief among all these northern kingdoms, and now the threat was right at their doorstep. So Jabin acted swiftly. He sent messages to Jobab, the king of Madon, and to the kings of Shimron and Akshaph. He also reached out to all the surrounding kings in the north, those in the mountains, in the valleys near the Sea of Chinneroth, along the western coasts near Dor, and throughout the territories of the land of Mizpeh. These kings gathered with their armies. There were so many soldiers, it was said they were like the sand on the seashore, too many to count. They brought with them countless horses and chariots. This massive coalition marched together and camped near the waters of Merom, ready to go to war against Israel. But God spoke to Joshua with reassurance. He told him not to be afraid, because by the next day, all of those enemies would be delivered into Israel's hands. God instructed Joshua to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots, a sign that Israel would not depend on such military power, but on God alone. Joshua wasted no time. He and his warriors moved quickly and launched a surprise attack at the waters of Merom. The Lord delivered the vast armies of the enemy into their hands. The Israelites struck them down and chased the survivors far north, even to Great Zidon, to Misrephothmaim, and to the valley of Mizpeh in the east. Not one enemy was left standing. Joshua did just as God had commanded. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. Then he turned back and captured Hazor, killing its king with the sword. The city of Hazor, which had led the Northern Alliance, was completely destroyed and set on fire. Every person in the city was put to death. None were left alive. Joshua went on to conquer all the cities of those northern kings and their people. He followed exactly what Moses had commanded. While some of the cities were spared, Hazor alone was burned to the ground. The Israelites took all the valuable goods and livestock as plunder, but every human enemy was destroyed, leaving none alive. Joshua was faithful and thorough, leaving nothing undone of all that the Lord had instructed through Moses. He took the entire region, the mountains, the southern lands, the land of Goshen, the valleys, the plains, the mountain of Israel, and even the lowlands. His conquests stretched from Mount Halak, near Seir, all the way to Baalgad in the valley of Lebanon under Mount Hermon. All the kings in these territories were defeated and killed. This wasn't a short campaign. Joshua fought many battles over a long period. And not a single city made peace with Israel except the Hivites of Gibeon. All others were taken by force. The Lord had hardened their hearts so that they would come against Israel in battle, ensuring their complete destruction, just as God had commanded Moses. During this time, Joshua also wiped out the Anakims, the giants of the land, from the mountains, from Hebron, Debir, Anab, and all the hill country of Judah and Israel. Only a few of them remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. None were left in the rest of the land. Finally, Joshua had taken the entire land, just as the Lord had promised Moses. He gave it to the people of Israel as their inheritance, dividing it among the tribes. And after all the battles and victories, the land at last had rest from war. The first half of the book of Joshua is a breathtaking journey of faith, obedience, and divine power. We began with Joshua stepping into Moses' shoes, uncertain but commanded to be strong and courageous. And from the very first step into the Jordan River, we saw what happens when God's people move forward in faith. The Lord held back the waters, brought down walls, and turned impossible battles into miraculous victories. From Jericho to Ai, from Gibeon to the waters of Merom, God fought for Israel, not because of their strength, but because of his promise. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.